Hello and welcome to DarkDreamWeaver. Today we are talking about the third man syndrome. So imagine you're lost in the middle of a sudden blizzard, with no idea where you are and no clue where you're going. You're disoriented and feel faint, and see your hands turning blue, losing sensation on your frozen fingertips. You're ready to give up, but then you see it. A hand firmly grasps yours and guides you through the snow, dragging you to a nearby cave for shelter. You turn to thank your savior, but there's no one there. You're all alone, and have been the whole time. Who is your savior? And why have they been showing up across the world to save people in times of need? In 1916, Antarctic explorer Ernest Shackleton was faced with a nightmare. He was set out with two others on a 36-hour-long hike across a barren, frozen island. For more than a day straight, the three men hiked over mountain ranges and glaciers, walking through cutting cold, all in the mere hopes of survival. It was a trek that few could make, but as they walked, Ernest had the strangest feeling, a presence accompanying him, as if there was an invisible fourth member by their sides, unseen, but ever present. More than a year prior, he had ventured to the Antarctic with a full crew of 28 in his expedition. But his ship, the Endurance, had been trapped in the ice and adrift for 10 months. After running out of food, the crew resorted to eating seals, penguins, and even their sled dogs. Things went from bad to worse as the ship was destroyed, crushed by the thick, shifting sheets of ice on the sea and sent jumping into the air by the pressure placed upon it. His crew abandoned ship, left in the perhaps more terrifying situation of being adrift on ice floes for another 5 months, where they set up camps. Eventually, they managed to escape to Elephant Island. It's a desolate and uninhabited South Shetland Islands off the coast of Antarctica, covered in icy mountains. From there, Ernest and 5 others managed to make a dangerous ocean crossing to the island of South Georgia, charitably described as barren. While this might not sound like a step up, there was one key difference. South Georgia had a whaling station on the opposite side of a mountain range. They would have to walk the rest of the way, but there was a problem. 2 of the men were too weak to make the trek, so Ernest had them stay behind, looked after by one of the healthier men. Then he and 2 others walked. They walked for 36 hours straight. Miraculously, all 3 made it through the journey alive, but there was something else, a presence that they couldn't quite place. Afterwards, Ernest wrote in his journal that, "I know that during that long and racking march of 36 hours over the unnamed mountains and glaciers, it seemed to me often that we were 4, not 3. At the moment, Ernest said nothing to his companions. But in his book, South, he recalls that unprompted, the others told him that they had shared the same feeling. What's even more miraculous is that not only did Ernest and his 2 companions survive the hike, but not a single member of his expedition lost their lives. It took Ernest 4 months to rescue his crew from Elephant Island, but everyone made it home, surviving off of whatever they could find in the meantime. It's an inspiring story, inspiring enough that T.S. Eliot wrote a poem about the experience. Who is the third who walks always beside you? When I count, there are only you and I together, but when I look ahead up the white road, there is always another one walking beside you, gliding wrapped in a brown mantle. Hooded, I do not know whether a man or a woman, but who is that on the other side of you?" Eliot took a few liberties in his retelling of the story, like reducing Ernest's party from 3 members, down to 2. But in doing so, Eliot inadvertently created the name for this phenomenon, third man syndrome, also known as the third man factor, and this third man would go on to influence those around the world. In 1933, a British explorer, Frank Smythe, was attempting to reach the peak of Mount Everest. He had traveled up the mountain as part of Hugh Rutledge's expedition. The expedition set out with 16 members, including its transport and wireless officers, and set up a base camp on May 1st with some difficulty due to high winds. Over the course of a month, the expedition attempted to scale the mountain, but never reached the peak. On June 1st, Frank made one final attempt to scale Everest to reach the top. At first, he was joined by Eric Shipton, another member of the expedition, but soon Shipton was forced to turn back. Even with all 15 of his companions turned back, admitting defeat, Frank continued up the mountain with one last companion, braving the cutting wind and freezing cold. 1,000 feet short of the peak, Frank was forced to turn back. At one point on the downhill journey, Frank broke off a piece of mint cake to give to the sole companion who had remained with him. But there was no one there. Frank was alone. He had been this whole time. But despite that, he had always felt like someone was there, climbing alongside. Later, writing in his diary that he had a strong feeling that I was accompanied by a second person. The feeling was so strong that it completely eliminated all loneliness I might otherwise have felt. 50 years later, another mountain climber would find himself accompanied by this third man. April 1st, James 70 was scaling Deltaform, a mountain in the Canadian Rockies, with his climbing partner, Richard Whitmire. The two had made it about 650 meters up the mountain when Richard suddenly called out, "Falling ice." Thankfully, The chunk of ice missed James, but it was followed by the roar of falling snow, a horrifying sound to hear that means one thing: tragedy. Then it struck. An avalanche rolled down the mountain and caught both James and Richard, sweeping them down the mountainside. An hour later, James awoke, buried in the snow and critically injured. Tragically, his climbing partner had already passed. James knew he couldn't make it, that he too would be lost forever in the snow beside his climbing companion. But just as he made the horrifying realization, he felt a presence, another person, who was now telling him that he couldn't give up, and carefully explained what to do in order to survive. Following their advice, James managed to make it back to camp. There he cried out for help and was rescued by nearby skiers who heard him, at which point the mysterious presence that had ensured his survival departed just as suddenly as it had arrived. James had survived all thanks to the mysterious third person. So what, exactly, is third man syndrome? Perhaps it's a literal guardian angel, descended to help people through hard times. Maybe it's the manifestation of your right brain, analyzing a dangerous situation and speaking out to ensure your survival. Or perhaps it's our ancestral instincts, rising up in times of extreme stress and reminding us of inherited traits from the days of gathering berries and fighting wolves. Well, to tell the truth, we don't exactly know what it is, but we have some pretty good ideas. Third man syndrome is likely a hallucination reaction to stress stemming from our subconscious. Add in the fact that this third man has been recorded as providing useful information to those in times of life-threatening pressure and stress, like what Ernest Shackleton, Frank Smythe, and James 70 went through. And like Eiffel Science, we can safely conclude that it is probably a survival resource meant to keep us alive. But, third man syndrome has also been used outside of directly life-threatening situations, too. The phenomenon has shown effective results in therapy in order to help people deal with trauma. In these situations, the third man is used to lend imagined support and comfort through internal dialogue in times of need, according to clinical psychologist Dr. Lissa Johnson. She describes helping patients overcome traumatic experiences by using the same kind of response to cause a patient's psyche, or an inner self, to provide external support of a kind. It may not be so much a matter of survival, but it's still a stressful scenario where that extra support can be invaluable. And what the third man appears as differs from person to person. For some, like Ernest and his Antarctic expedition, it was an invisible, intangible presence, serving as an additional companion. But others have described this presence as other beings: an old, bearded man clad in white, looking like Gandalf the White from Lord of the Rings. Others have seen friends or family members who had already passed, giving them advice and encouragement, like Peter Hillary, a New Zealander who traveled to the South Pole in 1998. Alongside two traveling companions. During the brutal journey, Peter became convinced that he was accompanied by his late mother and past climbing friends. Two Redditors also shared stories of being accompanied by an unknown woman after being caught in car accidents. In both instances, the woman helped calm the Redditors, and assured them that everything would be alright. Another Redditor shared a story from their father, who had fallen from a cliff and broken his leg and back. He claimed to have been kept company by a girl until help arrived, though when asked, the man's rescuers said there had been no one else present. Whether it's a hallucination or a survival response, the sheer number of stories we have of third-person syndrome shows how widespread an experience it is. And the way that it's used in therapy, survival encounters, and stressful events like a car crash shows that even in the most stressful times, there's always someone looking out for us, even if that someone also happens to be us. Thank you for watching. You can check out my other videos. Since we are new clan, would be really helpful if you decide to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment about other stories or topics what we can cover up. See you in following video and stay safe.